He does not break well from the gate. That was the verdict the handicappers printed in the spring of 2026, when the analysts at Racing Dudes projected the Bay Colt at 40-1 and wrote that his slow beginnings left him with far too much to do by the time the real running started. A horse filed away as a lottery ticket, an animal who would need a pace collapse and a mountain of racing luck simply to pick up the scraps behind better horses. Yet within the space of 5 weeks, that same colt ran down 2 entire Grade 1 fields, once in a Kentucky Derby run at fractions that bordered on self-destruction, and once in a Belmont Stakes that offered him no collapsing pace at all, and he won both races from the extreme back of the pack. How does a horse hand his rivals a dozen lengths and still reach the wire first? The answer hides inside a single closing fraction recorded at Churchill Downs, a number that separates this colt from nearly every celebrated closer of the past 20 years, and that number will not surface until the final chapter of this story. His name is Golden Tempo. February 7th, 2023, in the bluegrass country of Kentucky, the colt arrived at the historic Phipps stable operation, bred in partnership with St. Elias Stable, the product of a mating that read less like romance and more like an engineering document. His sire was Curlin, a 2-time Horse of the Year whose offspring carried stamina the way other bloodlines carried raw speed, a stallion who populated the final furlongs of American racing with grinding, relentless, heavy-shouldered runners. His dam was Carumba, a daughter of the 2006 Preakness winner Bernardini, a mare who did her best running at a mile or farther and who captured the Grade 3 Top Flight Invitational Handicap in 2016, over a mile and an eighth, carrying a female line the Phipps family had cultivated across generations, blending old money with old stamina. The Pedigree page held one more signature, an inbreeding to the stallion, Mr. Prospector in the 3rd generation on the sire's side and the 5th on the dam's, class stacked deliberately on top of class. Everything about the cross pointed toward a single kind of racehorse, an animal built not for the first quarter mile, but for the last, a runner whose engine would be opening while every other engine was shutting down. The racing public tends to treat deep closing as a tactic, a choice a jockey makes the way a chess player selects an opening. The truth written into this colt's blood was harsher and simpler than that. He was bred to be behind, bred to conserve, bred to detonate late, mixing patience with violence and economy with brute force. The pairing also carried a shadow that no breeding plan could wash out, because Curlin, for all his brilliance, had never sired a Kentucky Derby winner, and his record in the race was not merely empty, but cruel. His sons Exaggerator, Good Magic, and Journalism had all crossed the wire second in America's biggest race. 3 runners up and no roses, a pattern the industry had quietly begun to call a curse. A colt designed this carefully, from a family this deep, should have marched through his early career like a procession. Instead, he stumbled into 2 straight defeats that appeared to confirm every doubt his critics would ever raise. The blueprint had been written in the bloodline. The racing world simply refused to read it, and by the spring of 2026, the world believed it had gathered all the evidence it needed. December 20th, 2025, at Fairgrounds in New Orleans, Golden Tempo made his debut in a 6-furlong maiden race and won by a length and a half at odds of 5-2, drifting toward the rear early before pounding home late, the whole pattern already visible in miniature. 4 weeks later, on January 17th, 2026, he collected the LeConte Stakes by 3/4 of a length at the same price, and his earnings climbed to $333,000, the tidy beginning of what looked like a serious campaign. Then the ground shifted beneath him. In the Grade 2 Risen Star Stakes on February 14th, he finished 3rd, beaten 6 lengths, and on March 21st in the Louisiana Derby, he finished 3rd again, a length behind Pavlovian and Emerging Market, colts, the industry ranked among the leading contenders for Louisville. The numbers men went to work, and the numbers men were merciless. His last 3 buyer speed figures read 88, 84, and 81, a descending staircase at the precise moment a Derby horse's figures are supposed to climb, and set against rivals posting bigger numbers. The arithmetic looked less like a statistic and more like a sentence. Racing Dudes delivered the dismissal that would follow him to Churchill Downs, writing that he just does not break well, that he left himself far too much to do, and that he may simply not be good enough at this level. The doubts multiplied around him like flies in a shed row. He had raced at one track and one track only. He had never posted a figure that frightened anybody. He had lost 2 consecutive preps to horses he would have to meet again on the first Saturday in May. The critics were grading him on a sprinter's virtues, gait speed, early position, raw pace, and finding him bankrupt in all 3, while the quality that actually defined him sat entirely outside their instruments. What none of the figures captured was the shape of those 2 defeats, because a deep closer's run depends on a setup, on leaders burning each other down at the front, and the races he lost had never offered him one, a distinction that separates a horse who cannot run from a horse who was never given the race his style requires. The figures said ordinary. The figures were measuring the wrong 2 furlongs, and inside one barn in particular, a trainer was quietly turning the colt's most ridiculed flaw into a loaded weapon. Cherie DeVaux entered the story carrying a resume that commanded respect without commanding headlines, a trainer who had already produced a Breeders' Cup Mile winner and a champion turf mare, and who now kept in her care a colt the industry had filed under hopeless. Her answer to the criticism was not to fix the slow break, but to protect what lived behind it. Deep closers are not slow horses, and the mechanics of galloping explain why. Biomechanists who study running styles note that a thoroughbred's speed is the product of stride length multiplied by stride frequency, and that the horses who fade in the final furlong are usually the ones who spent their stride early, churning at maximum frequency through hot opening fractions until fatigue shortens every reach of the foreleg. Accounts from those who analyze closing types describe the opposite profile, a horse who lopes through the opening half-mile in a long, unhurried cycle, spending almost nothing, then holds his full stride length through the stretch while the strides of the leaders collapse around him. Under that reading, the closer does not actually accelerate past tired horses in the lane. He simply stops, slowing down last. Golden Tempo's despised gait manner, viewed through that lens, was not a defect at all, but the visible edge of an economy, the surface symptom of an engine tuned entirely for the final quarter mile, laziness in appearance and thrift in function. Jose Ortiz, who had been aboard for every start of the colt's career, rode him to match, braking without panic, sliding toward the rail, hoarding every yard of ground, and asking his horse the question exactly once per race. The timing of that single question is its own discipline, because a closer's move launched half a furlong too early burns the reserve into a headwind of still fresh rivals, while a move launched half a furlong too late runs out of racetrack, and the margin between those two mistakes, riders of closing types have long insisted, is measured in strides rather than seconds. Ortiz built his entire style around reading the moment the leader's rhythm broke, waiting with a stillness that looked like surrender and struck like an ambush. The partnership carried an obvious vulnerability that DeVaux never pretended away, because a style built on running down exhausted leaders requires leaders who exhaust themselves, and a race with no early heat leaves a closer chasing horses whose tanks never emptied. What would happen on the afternoon the pace refused to collapse? That question would shadow the colt through the entire spring, and it would be answered twice, in two opposite ways, on the two biggest stages the American sport owns. The first answer came at Churchill Downs, in a race run at a tempo that bordered on madness. May 2nd, 2026, Louisville, Kentucky, the 152nd running of the Kentucky Derby, and the scene beneath the twin spires assembled itself the way it has for a century and a half, a 19-horse field loading into the gate, a crowd pressing against the rails in the spring heat, and a bay colt from New Orleans standing on the tote board at 23-1, dismissed by the betting public almost as thoroughly as he had been dismissed in print. The morning line experts had ranked him among the afterthoughts. The sheets showed 3 straight declining figures, and the colts who had beaten him in Louisiana stood shorter in the market, so the case against him arrived at the gate fully documented. The gates crashed open, and he broke without urgency, dropping to the rear of the field while Ortiz angled him toward the rail, dead last in a 19-horse cavalry charge, surrendering the kind of ground that most horses never recover. Up front, the leaders were riding his opportunity in real time, ripping through the opening quarter mile in under 23 seconds and the half mile in under 47. Fractions that read like bravado in the moment and like a confession 2 minutes later, a pace that was not building a victory but scheduling a collapse. Through the far turn, the field began to buckle, and the bay colt began to move, picking off 5 rivals around the bend and reaching the head of the stretch still 13th, with 12 horses standing between him and the wire and a furlong and a half of racetrack left to solve the problem. Ortiz made the decision that would define the race, refusing the wall of traffic on the inside and swinging his colt more than 10 paths wide out into the open, trading distance for daylight. Then came the detonation. Golden Tempo surged down the center of the track with his stride at full reach, while the strides in front of him shortened and died, pounding past horse after horse as if the race contained 2 different finish lines, one for him and one for everyone else. The picture in the stretch told the whole biomechanical story in a single frame, 18 horses churning at a frequency their bodies could no longer fund, and one horse still stretching through his full cycle, his reach unbroken, his rhythm untouched, spending in the final furlong the fortune he had banked in the first 6. At the 16th pole, only Renegade remained, the Todd Pletcher-trained colt grinding along in front, and the 2 of them drove for the wire locked together, stride matching stride, one horse emptying and one horse still filling. Golden Tempo won by a neck. The grandstand answered with the roar reserved for last to first Derby winners. The tote board told its own story with a 23-1 shot standing in the winner's circle. And the record book told a bigger one, because Cherie DeVaux had just become the first woman ever to train a Kentucky Derby winner. And Curlin, after 3 agonizing runners-up, had finally sired one. The clockers held the biggest story of all. Though almost nobody noticed it in the noise, a set of closing numbers buried in the chart that would take on their full meaning 5 weeks later. In the aftermath, Ortiz stripped the mystery from his ride with one plain explanation. "I knew my horse was a deep closer, so I don't have any interest in being in front early," he said, describing how he broke, saved ground along the rail, and waited, hoping for a fast pace and getting one. The press reached for the word fluke in a dozen different fonts. A last-to-first Derby at long odds fit a familiar template, the once-a-decade lightning strike, the closer who catches one perfect storm and never catches another, and the skeptics had history stacked on their side of the ledger. 4 days later, on May 6th, DeVaux handed them fresh ammunition, announcing that Golden Tempo would skip the Preakness Stakes and train straight for the Belmont, making him the 2nd consecutive Derby winner to walk away from a Triple Crown bid, a decision that drew fire from purists who accused the connections of protecting a reputation instead of testing one. The criticism missed the colder logic underneath, 5 weeks of recovery instead of 2 for a horse whose entire method depends on arriving at the final quarter mile with everything left. The doubters had been handed their fluke narrative, and the barn had been handed its timeline. Saratoga would decide which side had read the horse correctly, and Saratoga was preparing to offer him none of the chaos that Churchill had. June 6, 2026, Saratoga Springs, New York, the 158th running of the Belmont Stakes, contested at a 1.25 miles instead of its traditional 1.5 miles, because Belmont Park sat mid-demolition in a $550 million rebuild. The third straight year the test of the champion had been exiled upstate. 9 horses went to the post. Renegade, the Derby runner-up from the Pletcher barn, was hammered down to 8-5 favoritism, while Golden Tempo, a Kentucky Derby winner asked to prove himself all over again, went off as merely the third choice in the wagering, a demotion that measured precisely how little the public trusted what it had watched in Louisville. DeVaux did not pretend the assignment was comfortable. "We just have to hope that a pace materializes with his running style," she said in the build-up, conceding that without one, Ortiz would be forced to improvise a plan B from the saddle. Rain began falling over the old track just before the gates opened, and then the race unfolded as the exact nightmare the skeptics had promised. He broke and settled at the extreme rear once again, 12 lengths off the lead down the backstretch, last of the last, with Renegade and Commandment stacked just ahead of him, 3 closers parked at the back of a race that was refusing to come back to them. Power shift and growth equity carried the field along at fractions that never approached Churchill's violence. 23.96 seconds for the opening quarter, 48.29 for the half, 1 minute 12.38 for 6 furlongs, and a mile in 1 minute 37.56. Moderate numbers, honest numbers, numbers that left the leaders breathing, the arithmetic of a closer's funeral. On the second turn, Ortiz began the move, tracking Renegade and Commandment as they lifted the tempo, and by the end of the bend, all 3 had swung to the outside and drawn level with the tiring leaders. 3 horses fanned across the track and driving as a single line into the stretch. The duel compressed to 2. Golden Tempo and Commandment broke away from Renegade and slugged through the final furlong stride for stride, and every time Commandment loaded another run on the outside, the bay colt answered it, grinding rather than sprinting, refusing rather than flinching. Golden Tempo won by 1.25 lengths, stopping the clock at 2 minutes 3.49 seconds. The exacta with Commandment paid $55.67. The favorite Renegade faded to third, and the sport was forced to rewrite its arithmetic on the spot, because Golden Tempo had just become the 13th horse in history to win the Kentucky Derby and the Belmont Stakes without the Preakness in the same season, and Cherie DeVaux had become the first woman ever to train the winners of 2 Triple Crown races. Ortiz supplied the sentence the sport would repeat for the rest of the summer. Commandment kept coming from the outside, but every time he got closer to him, I felt like my horse gave me another gear and another gear, he said. The fast pace excuse died at Saratoga that evening, and the fluke theory died with it, which returns this story to the number planted at its beginning. Buried in the Churchill Downs chart from the first Saturday in May sat Golden Tempo's closing fractions, a final quarter mile in 24.52 seconds, and a final eighth in 12.08, splits that analysts described as exceptional for a 3-year-old finishing a 1.25 mile race, and he recorded them while traveling more than 10 paths wide, covering extra ground that no chart ever credits. Horses are supposed to slow down at the end of 10 furlongs. This one, in the deepest water of the race, was still traveling like a horse with somewhere to be. Set those numbers against the most celebrated closers of the modern era, and the separation turns visible. Zenyatta, the towering mare who won 19 consecutive races and ran down an entire field of males from dead, last in the 2009 Breeders' Cup Classic, built the bulk of her legend on California's synthetic surfaces, circling chaos on tracks that flattered her rhythm, and even her brilliance ended in a defeat measured in inches when the trick was asked one time too many. Rich Strike, The 80-1 shock of the 2022 Derby needed a historic meltdown up front and a rail-skimming passage through traffic to land his miracle, and he never won another race. Mind That Bird, the 50-1 gelding of 2009, caught a sloppy track and a once-in-a-career ride along the fence, and he never won again either. Those were events, single collisions of pace, luck, and timing that their own horses could never reproduce, lightning preserved in a bottle that only held it once. Golden Tempo produced the run twice in 5 weeks, once into the teeth of a suicidal pace and once into the teeth of a moderate one, on a fast track and in the rain, with a perfect setup and without any setup at all. The distinction is the entire story. The structure of modern American racing explains why the lane keeps appearing for him, because decades of commercial breeding have loaded dirt fields with speed. Prep races reward early position and punish patience. And when those speed-heavy fields stretch out to classic distances, the mathematics turns on them, producing either a full collapse like Churchill or a bunched, tiring wall of leaders like Saratoga. And either outcome opens a corridor on the outside for the one horse who has spent nothing. The sport, in chasing speed for 40 years, has manufactured its own predator, and it keeps loading the same trap at every classic distance, fields stuffed with brilliance up front and fragility underneath, races that begin as sprints and end as reckonings. A horse engineered for the final quarter mile does not need the trap to spring the same way twice. He only needs it to spring. Once is luck. Twice is a formula. The question that remained was whether the formula carried a breaking point, and the first hint of an answer arrived within 3 weeks, wearing the plainest disguise imaginable. Late June 2026 delivered the reminder that no formula runs on rails, because Golden Tempo came down with a minor illness, and DeVaux, who had originally pointed him toward the Jim Dandy Stakes at Saratoga, scratched that plan and redirected his summer toward a single target, the Travers Stakes on August 29th, the Midsummer Derby, the race that would put every question about him back on the table at once. The venue itself carries the threat. Saratoga has historically favored runners with tactical speed, horses who sit close to the pace and strike early, and the 2 Belmont editions run over the track before his own had been won from just off the pace and from a stalking trip, a pattern he interrupted rather than disproved. The Colts method also carries a failure mode that no closing fraction can erase, because a deep closer's race can be strangled in 3 separate ways: by a slow, strung-out gallop that leaves the leaders fresh at the top of the stretch, by a wall of traffic that never opens a lane, and by a single miscalculation of timing in a move that can be spent exactly once and never reloaded. Ortiz had already admitted after the Belmont that he had been worried, that his horse had needed some kind of setup and had won without one. And even that admission drew a line under the risk, because a rider forced to improvise in the saddle is a rider working without a margin for error. The doubters, thinned but not extinct, regrouped around the Travers the way armies regroup around a final ridge, arguing that every closer's luck carries an expiration date, that Zenyatta's expired by inches, that Rich Strike's and Mind That Bird's expired immediately, and that August would locate the flaw that May and June could not. The formula works until the afternoon a race refuses to cooperate. Whether that afternoon arrives on August 29th is the one question this story cannot yet answer. But the original question, the one printed in the spring, has been answered beyond appeal. The colt who was projected at 40-1, the colt written off as a horse who leaves himself far too much to do, spent a single spring dismantling the assumptions of an entire industry, and the old dismissal has aged into something closer to a confession, an admission that the sport's instruments measure how races begin while staying nearly blind to how they end. Golden Tempo broke a curse that had trailed Curlin through 3 second-place heartbreaks, carried Cherie DeVaux into the history books twice in 5 weeks, turned Jose Ortiz's patience into the most feared final quarter mile in America, and dragged the deep closer's reputation out of the lottery ticket bin and into the category of method, a style with mechanics underneath it, mathematics behind it, and a repeatable shape to it. The rejected running style, the doubting figures, the fluke headlines, and the two stretch runs that silenced them all now compress into a single sentence. A horse bred to finish was judged entirely on how he started. The lesson stretches far past one bay colt, because greatness in this sport has never been measured by gait speed, by odds boards, or by the confidence of expert projections, but by what remains inside an animal when the rest of the field has nothing left. And by that measure, the last horse out of the gate has been the first horse where it matters, twice. The Travers now waits at the end of August, with a track that favors his opposites and a fresh field that will try to steal the race before he can arrive to run it down. Does the formula survive Saratoga in the summer, or does the closer's clock finally run out? Share your thoughts below. Thanks for watching.